2 days later, the chief of police was arrested by the feds. It seems that Percy's email was being sent to him. He was the one who set Percy up for the bombing. He wasn't going down alone, and he fingered the senator as the brains behind the whole thing. The media went nuts. When the feds showed up at the senator's home and office, they found the senator had skipped. The feds vowed to find him and see that he was brought to justice for his crimes. Percy was given credit for his help in bringing the senator and the chief down. Percy smiled for days. "Detective Holmes speaking," he answered, stopping his phone from ringing. "Hi, honey. I just saw you on the national news," said Maria. "Want company for a week?" "Damn right I do," he answered, realizing his week just got better. She gave him the flight number and arrival time of her plane. The timing was wrong for the kids going with him to pick up Maria, but they would all go out for dinner the night she arrived. They said goodbye and hung up. The bug on the phone recorded the entire conversation and, following its pre-programmed instructions, sent the recording on. Maria was a nervous wreck. She was on her way to spend a week with her Percy. She had noticed an opening in her schedule for a week. She called her love and asked if he wanted company for the week. And of course he accepted. She no longer needed luggage on her trips. She now kept a complete wardrobe at his house. As she was walking down the jetway, she saw a crowd of reporters around him. He was famous now. It was through his actions that a vast crime organization was brought down. She was very proud of her man. She'd show him how proud tonight when she got him in bed. She knew when she was finished with him, she'd be sore. She couldn't wait. The next day found Percy at the arrival gate waiting for Maria's plane. Since his fame was still riding high, the reporters were keeping him company as he waited. The reporters asked almost every question he could imagine. He was waiting for them to start asking questions about his sex life at the rate they were going when he was rescued by Maria's plane landing and her appearance at his side. The reporters switched their questions to her for their walk to the luggage pickup and Percy's car. Percy finally managed to exit the parking garage and get on the highway. He quickly used his lights and siren to get away. Sometimes it pays to be a cop, he thought. Lost in conversation with Maria, he didn't notice the car pull alongside him. His first indication anything was wrong was the look of horror on Maria's face. He looked to his left and tried to avoid the car, but he knew he wasn't going to make it. He heard the sound of an automatic weapon starting to fire. It was the last thing he heard before the blackness took him. "Why can't I open my eyes?" he thought. Then his hearing started picking up sounds. Sounds he recognized as hospital noise. He tried to move his arms, but they were tied down. "What if that serial killer has me?" he thought. A female voice called out, "He's awake. Call the doctor." Percy felt as if a load had just been lifted from his chest. "Don't try and talk or move," the voice said. "The doctor will be right here." About 15 minutes later, the doctor had removed the tube from his throat and the tape from his eyes. They didn't untie his hands yet. They said something about chest injuries, and moving his arms would only prolong the healing. Then they dropped a bomb by telling him he had been unconscious for about 6 weeks. Before he could get any more agitated, the darkness returned. The nurse injected a sedative in his fore. The next time he opened his eyes, his kids were at his bedside. They were crying tears of happiness. Bill, his friend and boss, was sitting in a chair across the room. There was a sad expression on his face. I looked at him and said, "Maria?" He just shook his head. "No." I started screaming, "No, no." The nurse came in and gave me another shot. It was 12 hours before I was in the land of the living again. This time my kids were again at my side. They held me as best they could and asked me not to leave them again. They just didn't know what they would do without me. "Dad, we love you and need you. Please try to stay with us." "Okay," I said. My captain walked in the room. "You ready to hear all about it?" With my eyes starting to water up, I said, "Yes." It seemed that the senator and another man pulled alongside my car and started firing with an automatic weapon. I had swerved my car into their passenger side door and caused them to spin out. They hit a concrete bridge abutment. Their car exploded into a ball of flame. One of the bullets grazed my head and I was knocked unconscious. There were 3 other bullets that got me. Maria was hit in the head with 2 rounds. She never knew what hit her. The doctor said she felt no pain. "It was just too quick," he said. He was quiet for a while. The tears were running down my cheeks. I started sobbing my heart out. My Maria was gone from me forever. I saw the nurse inject my fore again, and then I remember nothing. This routine went on for the next few days. Every time I'd wake up and start to cry again, I'd get another shot in my fore. Finally, I was able to stay awake without breaking down. Both my kids were there with me. I found out later that they had been sleeping at my bedside since I was first brought down here from intensive care. When the hospital staff tried to get them to leave, They put up such a fuss that they were allowed to stay in my room. They took turns staying with me for almost 2 months. My body healed, but my heart still ached. 6 months later, I was attending my retirement party. My wounds were just too bad to be allowed to return to police work. They had me sitting at the head table with both my kids and Jenny's boyfriend Dean and a teenage girl sitting next to my son. I don't remember seeing her before, but Todd was never more than a couple of inches from her. I looked from them to Jenny. She just smiled from ear to ear. I guess Todd had found someone to love, or at least like a lot. As I looked at my kids and their friends, I really missed my Maria. A really big lump formed in my throat. When it was my turn to speak, I couldn't. Everyone there assumed I was chalked up by the party and all the speeches from my friends, when actually I missed Maria and I wanted to share this all with her. That night when I was home again and alone in my bed, I hugged Maria's pillow and cried all night. It was a long time before I could sleep through the night again. I missed my soulmate and best friend. It must have been a couple of months. I'm not really sure because I was still in a fog and had no idea of time passing. Jenny and Todd were on me all the time, and I couldn't get away long enough to get a drink. I wanted to visit Maria, but her body had been returned to Oregon and buried next to her late husband. I was in a coma when this happened. I never got to say goodbye. My financial guy, Jack, called me one day and invited me to lunch at the French restaurant near his office. I agreed to meet him at 1 o'clock the next day. I arrived at the restaurant a little early. My friend was already there waiting. When we walked into the dining room, it got very quiet. Then one by one the diners started applauding me. Soon there were guys patting me on the back and women hugging and kissing me. The most said words were "thank you." The second was "sorry." By the time I was about halfway across the room, I was being held up by my 2 friends. The tears in my eyes were affecting my vision. Suddenly I realized that they were steering me to an elevated dais. My children and their significant others were seated there, as well as a couple of elderly guys I didn't recognize. It looked as if I was set up again. At least this time it was by my family. I was seated at a head table, my children at my side. I was aware of what was going on around me, but I took no active part in it. It was like I was there physically, but mentally I was far, far away. And I guess I was. I kept reliving all the wonderful events that I had enjoyed with Maria. Then I would think about all the things we would have done if she hadn't been killed. "Dad," Jenny said as she shook my arm, "pay attention." I looked around and realized that everyone in the restaurant was standing while a toast was offered to me. It had something to do with what a great individual I was and how much I gave to the community. When it became my turn to speak, I slowly walked up to the mic. "Thank you all for these fine tributes," I began. "But you forgot to mention the 3 partners I was responsible for getting killed." It got very quiet in the room. The love of my life was murdered because of me. She had done nothing wrong. She only wanted to be with me and love me. I rewarded her devotion by getting her killed. I am not worthy of any tributes. A woman I recognized as a widow, whose husband was murdered, stood. She called out, "Detective, we feel your pain. We have all lived through similar situations. Many of us lost loved ones and we never had a chance to say goodbye. You helped us find some form of closure by just doing your job with compassion. On behalf of all the others like me in this room, I say thank you for all you've done and we share your pain." Someone on the dais grabbed me and guided me to a chair. Another individual took the microphone. "Detective Holmes, I represent the late Senator Guido's wife's trust fund. We have been told of your wishes to open a hunting and fishing camp. I'd like to present you with a check for $10 million to help accomplish this goal. My future was now secure. Damn, I wish Maria was there to enjoy it with me. I never got the chance to tell her my retirement plans and asked if she wanted to be a part of them. I don't really remember very much after that. The next thoughts I had were in my bed. Somehow someone had gotten me home and put me in my room. My life was in a daze, slowly spiraling down again as depression gained on me. Judith was sitting in her office. She was on the 20th floor of a newly renovated high-rise. This building was the current location to have your office as you were anybody. She was somebody now. She had worked hard and was now a senior partner in her law firm. She was looking out the window at the snow and dark clouds. She hated winter and was looking forward to her vacation trip to Belize. Her secretary opened her door and asked, "Would you like to speak to a Todd and Jenny Holmes? They claim to be the children of your ex-husband. They are young but very concerned." She picked up her phone and pressed the blinking light. She was greeted by what were the voices of a couple of teenagers. They asked, "Are you the ex-wife of Detective Percy Holmes, sometimes called Sherlock?" Sherlock, boy, he hated being called that. As she confirmed her identity, she remembered Percy fondly. For the next hour, she was bombarded by information by the kids and requests for her help. Under the constant barrage, she agreed. As she hung up the phone, she wondered if Percy was still going to bed. Time passed, I don't know how much. I just alternated between the chair in the den and the kitchen for another glass full of something to drink. I can remember the people trying to help me, but I just sunk lower and lower. What the hell are you doing to yourself, you a-hole? I heard. While I tried to remember the voice, I heard, "Get your butt out of that chair, Percy. I'm going to get you in the shower. You stink." Then I recognized the voice coming out of the fog. It was my ex-wife Judith, the big-time attorney. "What are you doing here?" I asked. "You divorced me and moved to Boston to join some big law firm. Can't you leave me alone to die in peace?" I begged. "Your son Todd somehow figured out who I was, and with the help of a Jenny called me," she roared back. "So get out of that chair and into the shower," she ordered. "I've got to get you cleaned up before I call the house cleaning service and get them started on this pig pen." She dragged me by the arm out of the chair and into the master bath. She started tearing my clothes off, ignoring my protests. "You haven't got anything I haven't seen before," she reminded me. "Remember, we were married once, and I wasn't that impressed by your equipment then." Oh yeah, I remembered her now. She was a real bitch with a mouth to match. She shoved me in the shower and turned on the water. I yelled. She hadn't waited for the warm water to reach the shower. By the time the water reached a comfortable temperature, she was in the shower with me, washing my hair with her clothes still on. She was being very careful not to get sprayed. "Don't get any ideas, Buster. I just didn't want to get my outfit wet. This is a $2,000 suit and a $300 hairstyling. Whoever built this shower enclosure put a state-of-the-art spray system in it. A person could pick which direction the spray would come from, front, back, side to side, top, and even up out of the floor. Judith had it set like a normal shower, the water coming out of the front spray head. She was still bitching at me as she washed my head. Honest, I don't know how it happened, but my hand accidentally pushed the all-on button for the shower. In 30 seconds, my ex went from a reasonably dry individual to looking like a drowned rat. She was spitting mad, and I was laughing my butt off. Her hair was a wreck, her makeup was running all down her face, and her clothes were ruined. She looked at me ready to kill, and then looked at herself and started laughing too. "Percy, you're an idiot, but I've missed you," was her answer, and she started kissing me. Somehow she ended up as naked as I was, and we washed each other. Some of her parts got really clean. As much as I wanted to. She said, "No." We got dried off and dressed. She took me into town to one of those damn hair salons. I wanted to stop at a barber shop, but that was not in her plans. I got the full treatment: hair styling, shave, manicure, pedicure, and worst of all, a wax. Damn, that hurt. But it was fun. We behaved like we used to do when we were first married. It took my mind off Maria. Later that night, we were sitting in front of the gas fireplace, sipping brandy that Judith had found in the cabinet. "Would you like to talk about it?" was all she asked. We sat there all night and talked. Well, actually, I talked and she listened. As the sun was coming up, she said, "You really loved her, didn't you? Too bad you and I never got that far." We curled up in each other's arms on the sofa and slept almost all day. That night we went out to dinner. Not any place fancy like she was used to, but a low-class Greasy Spoon with great cooking. We ate like pigs, laughing and joking the evening away. We stopped at the drugstore and bought some antacids for later. We slept together that night. No, we didn't have sex, we just cuddled. It was the best night's sleep I had since the shooting. I still missed Maria, but holding Judith helped ease the pain in my heart. Later in the week, we started making love. It took almost another week before I stopped calling her Maria in the heat of passion. One morning I woke to find her packing her suitcase. "You've healed as much as I can help you to. It's time for me to go back to Boston and continue my life." I pleaded with her. I cried real tears, but in the end, I drove her to the airport for her flight. "Percy, call me if you ever need to talk. But remember, I'll never replace Maria and I don't want to try," was her parting statement. As I watched her walk through the TSA checkpoint, I had a lump in my throat, but I realized she was right. That night I phoned Todd and Jenny and thanked them for finding Judith for me and asking them to come home. Todd was finished with high school, and Jenny was finishing her last semester before graduating. I was alone in a big house with a lot of memories. I made the decision to follow my dream and open a hunting/fishing camp. I took a local real estate agent to lunch and explained my wants and desires. He agreed to start looking. That's how I found myself in northern Vermont, standing in front of a boarded-up camp. It had a huge main house and 8 small cabins. It needed a lot of work, but it was back in the woods and had a small lake that was perfect for fishing. It just needed a little TLC to bring it back to life. Well, I had the time, the money, and the desire to bring it back. All I needed was the help of a few good contractors, and the locals were always looking for extra work. I bought the place. It took a long time to renovate the lodge. Well, maybe not as long as it seemed, but finally it was completed. I hired a mover and took all the stuff from my house in the city up to Vermont. Jenny and Todd helped with their stuff. It was a sad time when I stood looking at the empty old house and remembering all the good times I spent there with the kids. I remember the first and only Christmas Maria had together there. I got that lump in my throat again. I locked up and dropped the keys off with the realtor as I drove out of the city. I was on my way to starting my new life. I was no longer a cop, just a regular retired guy. I spent the winter at the camp mostly alone. Todd and Jenny were away at school and I only had the construction workers who were renovating the outbuildings and guest cabins. I'll admit I was lonely, but I kept busy. My first job was to find hunting and fishing guides who knew the area and could produce results. I did that by hanging around the locals and making friends. I ate 3 meals a day in the local diner. I spent more than one night at a local watering hole. Pretty soon I was known as an okay guy. Then I worked at hiring. Some of the locals helped me learn the woods by walking or snowmobiling around the area. They took me to what they considered the best spots to hunt game. Some of the other guys took me out on the frozen lake and pointed out all the fishing holes. By time spring rolled around, I had hired a small cooking/wait and housekeeping staff for the lodge. I had promises from some of the locals to guide for me. I had hired a couple of teenage boys to run my little marina. I was all ready to go except I didn't have any customers. I blitzed all the hunting and fishing publications with full-page ads proclaiming my camp. I advertised in some travel mags offering summer vacations. Something must have worked because we started getting customers. It was a trickle at first, but it grew. After fall hunting season, we slowed down to nothing. One of my employees suggested winter sports like snowmobiling, cross-country skiing, and ice skating. I advertised again and we got some takers. By the time we were open for a year, we were a year-round operation. Jenny graduated from college and came north to help. She was a business major and really helped out. Todd was still in college but spent every break helping us. I noticed that Dean Beggy, the young patrol deputy who adored Jenny, also spent a lot of his 4-day weekends with us. One day while out fishing with me, he asked if he could marry Jenny. I gave him the prerequisite hard time until he noticed that I was smiling. I wished him the best and welcomed him to my little family. I'm not sure when he asked Jenny, but suddenly she was all over me, showering me with hugs and thanking me, and telling me I was the best dad in the world. I guess giving my permission was what she wanted. We blocked off a week of reservations and had the wedding at the lodge. None of us had large families, so it was mostly the locals who came. Everybody brought a dish to pass, and a good time was had by all. You know that old expression about not losing a daughter but gaining a son? Well, in my case, it was true. Dean quit his job and moved up here. He was hired by the sheriff's department and put on road patrol. Judith came up for the wedding and stayed a couple of days. She knew the Jenny and Dean from the time she helped me with my recovery from Maria's death. She was happy to see them wed. Judith gave me a hard time while she was there. When she left, I missed her. She was a pain in the butt, but at one time she was my pain in the butt. Jermaine hid in the darkness. He was upset because he had to travel to another part of the country. He liked the Southwest. There were lots of illegal aliens to prey on. He was able to capture and kill whole families and not need to worry about them being missed. Most didn't belong here. He loved destroying their hopes and dreams of a new life in a new country. He became a great hunter of them. He enjoyed capturing and then cutting them up. He kept them alive as long as possible. One time he staked a family out for the animals to eat. He enjoyed that. He waited until all the lights went out in an isolated farmhouse. These people were good, hardworking, church-going individuals. He had watched their routines for about a week, hiding in some nearby woods. Tonight he was going to kill them. He felt a hardness start to form in his pants. Tonight would be a good night. After he was done enjoying himself, he'd take their old car and use it to travel to another part of the country. Vermont, he thought. That would be a nice place to visit. Lots of hunters in the woods soon. He would enjoy good hunting. He remembered a small hunting and fishing camp that he had gone to as a kid. Maybe it was still there. Percy was wandering around the lodge looking for something to do. Jenny had the business processes of the lodge completely under control. The kitchen and wait staffs were functioning at their usual high level of efficiency. The guides were doing their thing, and I had nothing to do. I was bored. This retirement thing was getting old. I decided to take myself into town and see what gossip was being spread around at the local diner. I hopped in my Xterra and headed for Gossip Central and some pancakes and coffee. I slowly drove into town and walked into the diner and started to sit at the counter when I heard, "Hiya, Sherlock." It was a voice out of my past mocking me. Luckily, it was a friendly voice. I looked around and spotted an old friend from the FBI. He was sitting with the sheriff. The Fed was in his usual suit, and the sheriff was looking shocked. "Hi, a-hole," I responded and walked over and joined them. We did the usual greeting that old work friends do. A waitress took my order. After she brought me some coffee, I asked, "What are you doing here? You're in a suit, so you're not on vacation. You're sitting with the sheriff," and he looks upset. "I guess this isn't a social call?" He looked at me and asked, "Remember Jermaine Jones?" I nodded in the affirmative. "He's still alive and headed this way." "Shit," was the best I could reply. "Master, the serial killer was still around." The Fed explained about all the killings they could attribute to Master. The killings in the deserts of the Southwest and his latest killing of an elderly couple in Ohio and the finding of the couple's car in New York State's Adirondack Mountains. Master's trail pointed directly toward this part of Vermont. I started feeling sick to my stomach. I just made it to the men's room before I vomited. After splashing some cold water on my face, I returned to the table. The three of us spent the next 2 hours discussing all our options. Our food never got touched. The sheriff agreed to update the state boys. We needed all the help I could get. That night I got my .50 cal Desert Eagle out of the gun safe and cleaned it. I felt that I would need it again before the year was out. Dean walked into my office and spotted me cleaning the gun. He took one look at the expressing on my face and asked, "He's back?" I just nodded. "The feds think he's headed this way." And then I explained my meeting at the diner. Dean took a .44 mag out of the safe and started getting it ready. He had heard enough about Master from Jenny and I that he knew to arm himself. He loved Jenny and nothing would hurt her again. He also got a small light handgun out for Jenny. The next morning I called a meeting of all my guides. I explained about my meeting with the feds. I told the guides that from today on they worked in pairs. One guide helping out guests and the other watching for Master and his traps. I ordered them to carry heavy caliber rifles and large handguns, and to keep them loaded. I got a little flack from some of them until I explained what Master was and how high his body count was. They stopped complaining. I don't know how they found out, but 2 of my summertime waitresses who were from downstate were picked up by their parents before the week was out. I walked out to their rides to give them their final checks and could see the fear in their eyes. I reached in my wallet and gave each of the girls an extra $200. It was a nice gesture, but it still left me shorthanded. I got on the phone and explained about my waitress shortage to my townie friends, and they agreed to put some help wanted signs in their windows. I also asked the local weekly newspaper to run a help wanted ad. I hoped I could get some results quickly. A week went by and I finally had a response to my ads. A young woman about 30 years old asked for an application. She was attractive, polite, and looked a little familiar. No, I know I didn't know her, but she reminded me of someone. Oh well, I guess after almost 30 years as a cop, everybody looks a little familiar. I took her into the dining room and was explaining how we do things when I heard a loud crash from across the room. Everybody turned and looked. My son Todd had dropped a tray of food. He was pointing at our new waitress and started hollering, "Tara, it's me, Todd, and that's Dad next to you." I caught her just before she hit the floor. She'd fainted. Tara was out of work and almost out of money. She was down to her last $40, and half of that would need to be put in her gas tank. She was in a small town in northern Vermont, and employment prospects didn't look good. When she stopped at the town's only traffic light, she noticed a "Help Wanted" sign in a window. "What the heck? I might as well stop and see what the job consisted of," she concluded. Well, that's how she found herself at a hunting lodge filling out a job application. In the prior experience box, she listed waitress at a few of the diners she had worked at, checkout clerk at a supermarket, and stock clerk at various stores. Not very impressive, she thought. Well, what did she expect from someone who had never finished high school? The next box was for the next of kin, if they needed to be notified. She left it blank, but it brought back painful memories. She remembered living with her mother and brother Todd on the West Coast. As if it was yesterday, she remembered one of her mother's many male friends breaking open her bedroom door while drunk. She hit him on the head with her bedside lamp as her tried to tear off her nightgown. Grabbing some of her meager possessions, she ran from the house. That was the last time she had seen her mother or brother. She missed her brother and wished she could have taken him with her, but he was too young and she was too scared. She wished she knew who her father was and how to contact him. Her father, she thought. Hell, he had never made any attempt to contact his family since her mother moved them away. She remembered looking in the mailbox for letters or cards from her dad at Christmas or her birthdays, but there was always nothing. She hoped for phone calls from him just to see if she was still alive. Nothing ever came. She gave up hoping. She just tried to be a mother to her younger brother because her mother had started her descent into the alcohol and drug addiction. She handed her job application to the owner. He seemed a nice guy in his 50s. He was tall and very fit-looking. When he spoke, he had a soft, kind voice. He was glancing at her application, so she looked around the lodge dining room. A kitchen door opened and out came a high school-aged boy carrying a large dinner tray. Their eye locked. He dropped the tray and yelled her name. It was her brother Todd. She glanced back at the owner and realized he was an older version of Todd. Her world suddenly turned itself upside down. She fainted. Todd came running over. "Dad, it's Tara, your daughter, my sister. She's come home." I picked her up and carried her into my office. Todd followed. I explained what was going on to Jenny, and she volunteered to clean up the mess in the dining room and help finish serving lunch. Tara started to come around. She looked at Todd and started to cry. "You got out," she exclaimed. She and Todd hugged and kissed like long-lost siblings because that's exactly what they were. I started to leave the room to let them catch up on their lives when Todd called out, "Dad, don't you want to meet your daughter?" I walked over and took her hand. "Hi, I'm Percy Holmes, and I'm your father. Long time no see." She pulled me into a great big hug and said, "It's about time, Dad. Try not to stay away so long the next time." Then she gave me a 1,000-watt smile and a great big kiss. I had my daughter back after all these years. "So, Dad, do I get the waitress job?" The three of us spent the rest of the afternoon learning about each other. Well, actually, Todd and I had already played this game years ago, only this time we needed to include Tara. Toward the end, I started to ask about her mother. I don't want anything to do with my mother. When I was 15, one of her customers kicked down my bedroom door and tried to assault me. I hit him with a lamp. My mother was too high on drugs to even know there was a problem. "Dad, I've been on my own since then. Please don't ever mention her again." Todd brought Jenny into my office. He introduced her to his sister by saying, "Sis, this is my other sister, Jenny." Dad brought her into our family after finding her homeless and living on the streets. They looked each other over. Jenny said, "You have the world's greatest dad. Please accept him into your life. I've taken your place for many years, but now I'll step aside and let you assume your proper place as his daughter. My husband and I will leave here and not interfere with your life here." Tara looked at her, her eyes filling with tears. "Please stay. I want to get to know you. If Todd accepted you, then you must be something special." Jermaine looked around the small village. He knew he was in Vermont. Soon he would be walking across the border into Canada, a new hunting ground. The urge to kill was very strong again. His last satisfying victims were in Ohio. It had been too long since he met them. The screams of their pain were fading from his memory. He was having trouble reliving them. He knew he had to kill again. He was sitting in an old pickup truck he had stolen in New York after killing a widow. She had died way too early. He had hoped she was stronger. His next victim will last longer. He will not hurry their death. It will be slowly and very painful. He was about to get out and go into a supermarket for the supplies he needed when a sheriff's car pulled up to the entrance. He picked up his gun from the seat, just to be safe. He watched as the deputy kissed his passenger. The passenger door opened and out walked his love, the girl he had kidnapped many years ago and had killed his sister to escape from him. He sat in his truck and watched her walk into the store. She had filled out nicely in the years that had passed. She was smiling at the people entering or exiting the store. She stopped to talk to some of the other shoppers. She looked happy. He thought, "She won't look so happy after I get a hold of her." He sat in his truck and waited for her to leave the store. He was going to follow her and rejoin her life. He was happy again. He began to plan what he was going to do to her. To him, these were happy thoughts. He sat there about an hour when a truck from a local hunting/fishing resort pulled up. The driver got out and walked into the store. He came back out with the girl, and they started loading bags of groceries in the back of the pickup. He watched them and memorized the name of the lodge. After they drove off, he got out of the truck and asked the shopper if she knew where the lodge was, explaining that he was a hunter and wanted to look the place over. "Oh, you just missed them. Jenny and her father just finished shopping here for some supplies," she answered and proceeded to give him directions to the lodge. "Jenny," he thought. "Now I know her name and where she lives. Soon she will be mine." He thought about how nice it would be hearing her scream. He remembered how she looking going into the store and thought, maybe I can make her last 2 weeks. As he started planning his hunt, he was smiling. Percy picked up Jenny at the store. He wasn't sure if she noticed, but anytime she went anyplace, Percy or her husband Dean were with her, and they were armed. They were her bodyguards. Percy was on full alert. The sheriff had cornered Percy in town. He gave Percy a badge and some ID. Percy was now a deputy. They discussed what Percy's responsibilities would be. When the discussion was over, Percy remembered there was no mention of pay. "I guess I'm not in the budget," he thought. About a week later, my phone rang. Perk, do you know where the widow Kelly's farm is on County Road 8? Meet us there. She's been murdered. Did she die hard? I asked. It looks as if she did. The coroner said she lasted about 3 days. The sheriff answered. It looks as if he's here. I called Dean at his and Jenny's cabin. All I said was, he's here. Dean was at the lodge about 5 minutes later. He had replaced his service revolver with the .44 mag. I got to the crime scene about 30 minutes later. The place resembled a circus. There were sheriff's cars, the coroner's wagon, some state cars, and an unmarked government car. My friend from the FBI was standing next to it talking with a couple of state guys and the sheriff. They waved me over. Hi, Sherlock, I was greeted. It looks as if he's here. The sheriff looked at me and said, Perk, your place is under 24-hour guard. We don't want anything to happen to Jenny. I thanked him. Can I see inside? I asked. They walked me to the barn instead of the farmhouse. When my eyes got used to the darkness in the barn, I spotted the widow Kelly. She was tied between some crossbeams. She had died hard. Someone had brutally mutilated her body. I felt sick to my stomach, but I stayed there. When I had retired from police work, I hoped I would never need to see this type of scene again. The coroner was just getting ready to cut her down and put her in a body bag. He was trying to do it alone, because no one had a strong enough stomach to help. I reached in his bag and grabbed some gloves. I'll help. I've done this before, I said. Between the two of us, we managed to take her down and start preserving her dignity. Most of the others in the barn were looking a little green when we got done. As I walked out of the barn, I thought, I'll bet the nightmares will be back tonight. The flash bulbs started going off as I was helping Doc wheel Mrs. Kelly's body out. The press had arrived. They were pressing the sheriff for a statement. He was out of his league here. One of the reporters remembered me from my years as a detective. Next thing I knew, I was giving the interview. The reporter told all his colleagues who I was, and that I'd tell them the truth. The reporters were started shouting all kinds of questions. One of the guys yelled, "How did she die?" "You don't want to know, trust me. Let's just say she died hard." I answered. It got really quiet. "Any suspects?" "Just one, and I hope he's not here." I answered. The reporters left me alone after that statement. The state CSI guys arrived and I got busy with them. I didn't want anything missed. One of the CSIs walked over to me and began talking. I was at a conference about a year ago when one of the guys brought up working with a detective named Holmes. He said they called the guy Sherlock, not because of his last name, but because he was that good at solving cases. He also said that there was only one case you never solved, a serial killer called Master. Is this his work? I looked at him a long time before I spoke. I think it's him. His expression got serious and he started talking to his guys. I hoped he was telling them to keep this extra information under tight lip, but to be very thorough. I walked around the farm for the next few hours. We discovered where the killer had hidden in the woods and watched Mrs. Kelly. One of the CSIs discovered where the killer had had a bowel movement. While it wasn't as good as a photo or fingerprints, it did give us DNA. Jermaine was getting sloppy. A few days later, one of the guides mentioned he met another hunter on a trail a few days earlier. The guy was out scouting for a good place to hunt turkey. What caught the guide as strange was that this was not turkey country. The birds just weren't in this part of the state. I jumped on that story and asked for a description. My guide described the guy as big, really big, and he had eyes that seemed dead. I called the sheriff and we made arrangements to meet with a sketch artist. I grabbed one of my rifles and started into the woods. I'd get the creep if it was the last thing I did. Jermaine was pissed. He had gotten sloppy and run into a local hunter in the woods. He quickly made up a story about scouting out good spots for turkey hunting. The guy looked at him funny after that statement and seemed to want to get away quickly. Jermaine just wished that he had killed the guy, but without a plan he couldn't act. His sister always said that by planning their crimes, they wouldn't ever get caught. So he learned to make detailed plans before acting. This one time he had no plan made for running into someone in the woods. He walked back to his hiding place, a small trapper's cabin, and started planning. He thought about his last killing. He had loved the way the widow screamed. She lived alone in a farmhouse far back in the woods. She had no neighbors or visitors. He had watched her for a week before making his move. One day, as she was heading for the barn, he struck. The first thing he did was hit her in the chest. Not hard enough to kill her, but enough to partially knock her out. He dragged her into the barn, tearing her clothes off as they went along. Jermaine tied her hands and feet. He tossed a rope over a beam and pulled her up by her hands until her feet were about 12 feet off the ground. He didn't have a gag like he and his sister used on their victims back home. When he remembered his home, he got very mad again. He made a vow to find that girl and make her pay. He hit the old lady again. Jermaine stayed with the old woman for 4 days. He slowly tortured her to death. All the time he was imagining it was the girl. Percy started his search of the woods by walking in circles. This was his grid pattern. Each circle got a little bit bigger. He searched for about 6 hours when he found the first signs of someone watching the lodge. The grass was matted down, and there were signs of someone laying there watching. I looked around and found this was an excellent location for watching everything that went on at the lodge. I got on my cell and called for a CSI team. My next call was to Ginny's husband, updating him on what I found. Dean and Ginny were at her doctor's getting a checkup. Dean said that he would hurry back as soon as the doctor was done. Dean loved her with all his heart and would die before letting Jermaine get near her. But I was still scared. Jermaine was crazy. He was a serial killer with no conscience, and he wanted Ginny. But I wouldn't let him get his hands on her again. Dean and I visited my OB/GYN for the tests. I knew that the results would be positive. I was pregnant. I only needed the doctor's verification. I couldn't wait to see the looks of surprise on my family's faces. For a moment, I wished Maria was still alive to enjoy this time. It took a little of the happiness out of the occasion. The doctor came back in the examining room and nodded, yes. I swore him to secrecy. I wanted to tell everyone myself. That night we had a family meeting. Percy's purpose was to discuss how Jermaine was watching us and how to use this to trap him. Jenny had a different agenda. She opened the meeting by saying, I'm pregnant. The baby is due in 7 months. I thought Dean would faint. He got very white and started swaying back and forth. Jenny looked at him and asked, how does it feel to know that you're about to be a daddy? He ran to her and gave her the biggest kiss I had ever seen them do. The rest of us sitting around the table started yelling and screaming. It was the best news I could have heard. Our discussion dissolved into baby names, whether or not to find out what the baby's sex was, and what construction was needed to add on to their 1-bedroom cabin, 1 extra bedroom or 2. We discussed baby showers and gifts, and who to invite and where to hold them. After about 2 hours of talking, the conversation started to run out. I made the decision not to spoil the evening by discussing a serial killer. The next morning at breakfast, all the staff and at least half the guests were congratulating on her pregnancy. Jenny was beaming and very happy with all the attention. I spent the rest of the day walking the surrounding forests looking for signs of Jermaine. I had another reason to hunt him down now. Jermaine lay on the ground. He was watching the lodge. The plan was coming together. He knew he had to act soon. Hunting season was coming, and it would bring men into the woods looking for game to kill. Actually, it was exactly what Jermaine felt he was doing, except that Jermaine was hunting men. Men were easier to find and kill. The only thing Jermaine didn't like was that the men in the woods were carrying weapons, and they were alert to what was going on around them. They were smart game. It would be nice to hunt them, but Jermaine needed to get the girl. The girl had killed her sister, and he was going to kill her, slowly. Jermaine had a bit of a problem. The girl was living with a deputy sheriff. The deputy was at her side all the time. Jermaine had to get the deputy away from the girl. He was slowly working out the details of that step in his plan. He smiled at the thought of what he was going to do to her. Percy was out patrolling the forest. He was looking for signs of Jermaine when he came across another spot where Jermaine had waited and watched. Percy quickly dropped to the ground and surveyed the area. He was watching any movement that Jermaine was still around. He smelled something familiar in the air. Percy then realized that he smelled a man's semen. He saw it on the ground and realized that Jermaine had laid here and done the deed. Jermaine was one sick SOB, thought Percy. He checked out the area again and saw no signs of life. When he was certain that it was safe, he pulled out his cell phone and called the local police. It was time to get the CSI guys up here again. Dean was patrolling the area around the north side of the lake. It was getting dark, and he would be off duty in a bit. His mind drifted to his lovely wife, Jenny. He couldn't wait to get back to her. They had only been married a short time and were still burning up the sheets. While they weren't trying to start a family, they really weren't taking any precautions. If it happened, it happened. And it had happened. She was 2 months pregnant, and Dean was as happy as a man could be. He was going to be a dad. He picked names and sex and furnishings for the baby's room in his mind as he was on patrol. He knew that he would run his choices by Jenny, but she would be the one to actually make the decisions. All wives were the boss. He knew that instinctively. He was running all the things that he had to do before the baby was born when the two-way radio went off. A CSI team was being dispatched to the area he was near. It was his patrol area. He had to go. As he picked up the mic to offer to help, the world went dark. Dean's sheriff's car rolled off the road and into a tree, activating a collision alarm on the dispatcher's console. Jermaine put his rifle on his shoulder and started trotting down the hillside away from the deputy sheriff's car. That takes care of the husband, now the girl, he thought. Percy heard those dreadful words, "Officer down," come over his radio. He heard the location. It was Dean's patrol area. He knew that every available unit would be racing toward the site. He started running back to the lodge. He felt it was a trick by Germain to draw away all the protection around the camp so he could get his prey. And Germain's prey was Jenny. He knew he had to get there first before Germain did. His age started showing. He was 55 years old and a little out of shape. He ran as far as he could before stopping to vomit. He wiped his face and started running again. He still had about 2 miles to go before he reached the lodge. He hoped that he would make it in time. No, he thought, I have to make it in time. He stopped and tried his cell phone, but there was no signal. He was between a couple of hills and the signal was blocked. There was no way he could warn them that Germain was coming. He asked God to give him the strength to keep running. It had been a very long time since he asked for anything. The last time was for a Christmas present when he was 10 years old. That prayer went unanswered. He hoped that this time he would be heard. He started running harder. Germain walked into the lodge through the open kitchen door. The cook saw him and started to tell Germain to use the front door. The cook died before he could utter a sound, a knife sticking out of his chest. Sally, the part-time waitress, died when Germain hit her in the middle of her chest. His punch burst her heart. Germain loved the feelings he was getting. He wanted to stop and inspect his kills, but he heard noises in the other room, so he continued on. Todd and Tara ran for the front doors of the lodge as the sounds from the kitchen reached them. They knew the lodge was under attack. Germain hadn't expected 2 of them in the dining room and hesitated for just a couple of seconds to change his plans and to acquire the new targets. Those seconds were enough for Tara to make it outside. She grabbed a pistol that was by the door and managed to fire 1 shot at Germain before she fled. In her panic, she dropped the gun on the ground. Germain tossed a knife at Todd, catching him in the back and one of his kidneys. Without stopping to deliver the killing blow to Todd, Germain then ran out the other door and started for Jenny's cabin. Tara hid behind a truck and watched Germain trotting toward Jenny's home. Tara couldn't shout a warning. Germain would just return and kill her. She waited until he was out of sight and dialed 911 on her cell. She explained what was happening as she ran to her brother. The 911 operator guided her through emergency first aid. She was able to slow the bleeding. She hoped Todd would live. She had just been reunited with her family and wanted nothing to happen to them. Tara heard one of the guides yell in pain. Then she heard Jenny scream. Jenny was making dinner for her, and Dean, when the door to the cabin burst open. Jenny knew that Master had found her, and she was finally going to die. She wanted her baby to live and grow, but it was just too soon in her pregnancy. She grabbed a butcher knife off the kitchen counter. She was planning on killing herself. She looked across the room, and there stood her worst nightmare, Master. He was covered in blood and holding the dead body of one of the guides as a shield. He was smiling and laughing his evil laugh. He never slowed down coming at her. She tried to kill herself, but he grabbed the knife, stopping her attempt. It was as if he never felt the pain as the sharp knife entered his hand. He grabbed her and hit her in the stomach, hard, causing her to black out from the pain and starting her toward a miscarriage. He picked her up and tore all her clothing off, thinking how bad he wanted her, tossing her over his shoulder and running into the woods towards his hidden vehicle, so that he could take Jenny away and start hurting her. He was really going to enjoy what he had planned to do to her. Germain felt her naked body on his shoulder. He couldn't wait to start her journey into the world of pain. He would try and make that pain last a long, long time. Germain had a vacant trapper cabin all set up for what he planned to do to Jenny. Germain was bleeding from the cuts on his hand and arm and in his side where the bullet Tara shot at him hit. The pain didn't bother him at all. In fact, he enjoyed it. It added to what he planned to do to Jenny. He noticed that Jenny was starting to bleed from between her legs. It didn't bother him. He liked blood. Unknowingly, his escape path took him on a collision course with Percy. Percy was close enough to hear Jenny's faint screams. He stopped running and listened. He could hear the sounds of someone running in the woods. The sounds were being made by someone big, not by a small woman. Percy felt that the sounds were being made by Germain. He dropped his hiking sticks and pulled out his Desert Eagle. He pushed the safety off. He started running toward the sounds, realizing that whoever it was running directly at him. He made sure a round was in the chamber and his extra clip was ready in case he needed it. He made up his mind that today was Germain's last day on Earth. Percy no longer cared about his personal safety. He was going to execute Germain or die trying. Percy only wanted to live long enough to save Jenny from a terrible death at the hands of Germain. He knew that if he couldn't save Jenny, he'd kill her. He would save her from that sick creep style of execution. At least he could make sure she died quickly and without any real pain. Percy found himself at a small clearing. The sounds of running were rapidly closing on him from the other side. Percy stopped and dropped to one knee. He held the gun steadily in both hands, waiting for Jermaine to emerge from the underbrush. Jermaine broke into the clearing. He was running hard, carrying Jenny over his shoulder. Jenny was naked and her body was red with blood. Jermaine was carrying a rifle in his other hand. The gun was pointed at Percy. There was no clear shot at Jermaine's head or body. Percy shot out Jermaine's knee. Jermaine went crashing down, tossing Jenny to his side as he fell. Jermaine tried to stand to bring the rifle back into play. Percy shot out the other knee, leaving Jermaine making animal noises and trying to crawl toward Percy on his knees. Jermaine's eyes were full of hatred. Jermaine smiled and said, "You'll never save her from me." Percy put another round in the middle of Jermaine's chest. Jermaine was now dragging himself by his hands toward Percy. He was still trying to bring the rifle into firing position. Jermaine wouldn't die, but Percy wasn't about to give up trying. Percy got to his feet and walked toward Jermaine. Percy aimed at Jermaine's head and emptied his gun while walking. Percy took out his spare magazine and reloaded. 6 more rounds entered Jermaine's head. By the time Percy reached him, Jermaine was no longer moving. His head was no longer recognizable as belonging to a human. Percy rolled Jenny over looking for any injuries and found none, even though she was covered in blood. He checked her pulse and found a weak one. Her heart was still beating. He picked her up and started running toward the lodge. She was making no sounds, but she was still breathing. He ran all the way to the lodge. When he got to the lodge, he was surprised to see 3 ambulances and what seemed like all the police cars in the world in the parking lot. A couple of officers ran to him and attempted to take Jenny away from him. He held her tightly and kept heading toward the ambulances. He shouted at the officers and told them where to find Jermaine's body. They hurried off into the woods in that direction. Percy reached the ambulances and a medic took Jenny from him. He took a deep breath and looked around. The first thing he saw was Tara covered in blood, crying over Todd. He started toward them when the pain hit. Suddenly his chest hurt and he couldn't breathe. His world went black. Percy opened his eyes, not knowing where he was. There was a drop ceiling and fluorescent lighting. He turned his head toward a beeping noise. He recognized a heart monitor. He tried to move, but his chest hurt like hell. A friendly voice told him to lay still. It sounded like a nurse. "This will help with the pain," was all he heard before it got dark in the room. Tara sat in the hospital. In front of her was her father. She had not been reunited with him for longer than 2 months. He was lying in a hospital bed, recovering from heart surgery. She looked at him hooked up to all kinds on monitoring equipment and various tubes and started crying again. She wanted to pray to God to let him live. She just didn't know how to accomplish this. It had been a long time since she was a little girl saying her bedtime prayers. In another room lay her baby brother. The doctors said he was out of danger. His kidney was healing nicely, and unless something went terribly wrong, he wouldn't need a transplant, but he would still need to be a little careful the rest of his life. She was there for him. She had told the doctor, if needed, she'd donate her kidney. So far it wasn't needed. Her dad made a groaning noise next to where she sat. Percy opened his eyes again. He saw a different ceiling. He turned his head. This time his chest didn't hurt as badly, but he still groaned. "Dad, are you awake?" He recognized Tara's voice. Slowly turning his head toward the sound of her voice, he saw her smiling face. He tried to talk, but nothing came out. Tara put a straw in his mouth, and he sipped some water. Gradually his voice returned. "Jenny?" he asked. "She's in the hospital mental ward. Nervous breakdown. She lost the baby, Dad," Tara said in a very sad voice. "Todd." "Okay. Stab wound, but doctors say he's out of danger." Dean. By Jenny's side 24/7. A bullet grazed his scalp, but he's okay. Percy started to cry. He wasn't exactly sure why, but he felt a great relief. Tara held his hand and cried with him. She had her daddy back and would never let him go again. "Dad, you killed Jermaine. He'll hurt no one else," she told him. Then she added, "Jermaine killed 3 more people before you stopped him." Percy's eyes continued to tear, but he knew she was right. Jermaine had to be stopped. But what a terrible toll it took. Percy closed his eyes and slept some more. He was trying to heal the mental wounds. Judith heard about the shootout on the national news. She knew that Percy and his family would need her help again. While she really wasn't a part of that little family, something way down deep inside of her wanted to be. As she was packing her bags, she was humming a little tune. There was a warm feeling in her chest. She was going to see Percy again. Suddenly she realized she still missed him after all these years. "Damn woman, you're over 50, get a grip," she thought. But she continued humming as she packed. Percy was lying in his hospital bed feeling sorry for himself. All those poor people hurt because I couldn't capture Jermaine. If only I was a little smarter, or maybe faster, Jermaine could have been stopped before slaughtering more people. I'd never forgive myself, he thought. The doctors told me that I had a heart attack and double bypass surgery. My chest still hurt, but it wasn't as bad as when I first woke up. I wondered how long I had been unconscious. I had no sense of any time having passed. I just slept, was awaked by the nurses or doctors for short periods, and slept some more. I just wanted to sleep. I couldn't take the pain of my losses. I was slowly slipping into a deep depression. "God damn it, Perk," said a familiar voice. "How am I going to make a living if I keep needing to come up here and hold your hand, you big baby?" "Hi, Judith," I said. "Can I hug you through all these wires and tubes?" "Please, I need a big one," I replied. She reached across the bed and did just that. It felt kind of good having her in my arms. I guess we must have knocked something loose because a couple of nurses came running into the room with looks of concern on their faces. When they saw Judith and I hugging each other, they relaxed. "Percy, don't get so excited without warning us. There are alarms going off all over the place," one of the nurses said. "And no sex," said the other after watching us a minute, a great big grin on her face. Judith just stood across the room grinning from ear to ear. Damn, that woman was proud of herself, I thought. For the next 2 weeks, I was assaulted by visitors. Judith sat by my side the entire time. She made every visitor, who wasn't part of my family, know that she was an attorney from a very prestigious law firm in Boston. No one gave her any shit. I'd swear that even the quality of the food improved while she sat there. Judith took no prisoners. Actually, Judith got along with all the nurses. I guess it had something to do with telling the doctors that they were being sexist and needed to be careful before someone sued them. Honest, I was there when she said it. After that comment, she and all the nurses were the best of buds. The doctors said, "Please," and "Thank you," a lot after that. I noticed that Tara and Judith were spending a lot of time together. This worried me. I knew how Judith was and didn't want to have Tara learn too many of my secrets. So I steeled myself and started a conversation with Judith. "Why are you getting so close to Tara?" I asked. "None of your business," she said. I threw a dirty look at her and found she was grinning from ear to ear. That damn woman loved to jerk my chain. "Perk, sometimes a woman needs another woman to talk to." Tara never had a chance to bond with another adult female. Her mother was just too far gone to help. "We're bonding." Her voice was soft and sincere. "You have a great daughter, and I'm trying to get to know her better. Now shut up and get well." How did I ever stay married to this woman so long? I thought. Then I remembered she was great in bed. Later that day, when Tara and Judith handed off babysitting duties, I got a chance to ask Tara what she thought of Judith. "Well, Dad, I think she's great. I wish I could have met her when you guys were married," was her answer. "Why did you guys divorce?" "She's such a great person and fun to be with," she asked. I explained that Judith left me to improve her career. I was a lowly cop and she was going to be a big city lawyer. Neither one of us would budge, so we divorced. I admitted that I still had a little place in my heart for Judith. I considered her a very good friend. I then told Tara about how Judith had helped me pull myself out of my depression after Marie's death. Tara got a little misty-eyed as I reveled the whole story. "Dad, would you get mad if I started calling Judith Mom?" she asked. I never had someone I could feel really wanted to help me. My birth mom always just acted as if I was extra baggage. "Not as long as you don't expect me to marry her again," I joked. She just smiled at me and said, "But it would make a nice Christmas present." She hurried out of the room to visit her brother. I had the feeling I was just tested. I'd have to discuss this with Judith. No, not the getting remarried part, but her being a part of my family instead of just an occasional visitor. The next morning, the doctor said they were planning on releasing Todd soon, but I still had another week or two before I was released. Then the doctor dropped the bomb. "Who's going to take care of Todd? He's not bad enough for a nurse, but he will need help showering, help using the bathroom and stuff." "Which one? His sister or the lawyer?" I could tell by the way he said lawyer who it was he wanted out of his hospital besides Todd. "I'll discuss it with him and let you know," I answered. That afternoon, I talked over the options the doctor requested with the girls. Tara and Judith both jumped at the chance. Judith gave me a funny look. I remembered that look from when we were married. She wanted to talk after Tara left the room. Judith started as soon as Tara left. I'm surprised that Tara volunteered. "Why?" I asked with real curiosity. "Fathers, they don't recognize anything. Don't you see how glassy-eyed Tara gets every time a certain young intern comes around?" she retorted. "Well, I do," she answered. "I guess I'll ask Todd who he wants," I stated. "I'll bet he answers the little red head Who visits him every day, was the answer I got. Debbie? I asked. Of course, stupid. It's a wonder you ever solved a case without having any powers of observation, she said happily. Okay, I give up. You work it out. And that's exactly what she did. I guess I could have offered some advice, but I doubt she would have listened anyway. Judith was that way. I don't know what I'm going to do with him, Judith thought. He is about the nicest man I ever knew, but he doesn't really have a clue. His son is infatuated with that red-headed girl, and Tara is making a fool of herself every time a certain intern is around. I'm going to need to sharp Percy up, she thought. For a hotshot detective, he's stupid. Then a funny thought entered her head. Shaping him up, that might be fun. The next day they brought Todd around to say goodbye. That's right, I said they, all three of them. My son looked as if he had a harem, but he only had eyes for Debbie. When I get out of this hospital, I guess I'd better invite Debbie's parents for dinner. Before they all left, I mentioned getting together for dinner to Debbie with her folks. Judith smiled at me as if I finally grew a brain. I spent the rest of the day alone in my room. I kind of missed Judith, or Tara sitting with me. Actually, I found myself missing Judith a little more than I missed Tara. Judith made sure everything was running smoothly at the lodge. Todd was under the care of Debbie days and Tara nights. Judith figured there was no point in pushing two hot-blooded teenagers together more than necessary, especially overnights. That brought her thoughts around to poor Jenny. She was lying in her hospital bed in a catatonic state. She had lost her child and maybe her mind. She felt a lump forming in her throat. After leaving them with a bunch of rules and a list of chores, she headed back to the hospital. She wanted Percy's support. She realized that she was leaning on Percy a little too much. When it was time to return to Boston, she knew that she'd hurt. Percy woke up and Judith was sitting there. I realized that I was starting to like her visits and missed her when she was gone. So what did you say that made the kids toss you out? I asked. No one tossed me out. We realized that you needed attention too, so we tossed a coin, she said. Then she added, I lost. When I snapped my head around, I saw the smile. She had pulled my chain again. She kept me company every day and well into the night until I was released 2 weeks later. When I got back to the lodge, I found all her things in my room. I looked at her and raised my eyebrows. She shook her head. No. The doctor said at least 2 months before you can, she replied. That night she joined me in the shower. I tried to get an erection, but it wouldn't cooperate. She looked at me and said, 2 months, remember? The next morning I heard noise coming from the dining room, so I went exploring. The dining room was full of guests, and they were all hunters. Debbie, Todd, and a woman I didn't know were waiting on the tables. I peeked in the kitchen and saw Judith cooking up a storm. I guess I was a little overwhelmed, as I just stood there with my mouth open. Tara was the first to spot me. Dad, sit down. You just had heart surgery. Next thing I knew, half the room was on their feet clapping and calling for me to join them. One of the guides helped me into a chair at his table. When they realized I had no idea of what all the fuss was about, he explained I was a national hero. I had killed Jermaine the serial killer single-handedly. I was on the national news for a week solid. They even kept interrupting regular TV with updates on my heart surgery. Todd brought me a heart-healthy breakfast as ordered by Judith. Did you ever eat bran cereal with soy milk? Egg white omelets? Turkey bacon? Well, at least Judith's heart was in the right place. I enjoyed her efforts with my glass of skim milk. Later that morning I called a meeting. All hands explained to me what was going on with the lodge. They had everything under control, and I was nothing but a fifth wheel until I got better. I went back to my room for a nap. That night I saw supper being delivered by the diner in town. They were cooking the food and Judith was just warming it up for the guests. Actually, it was a pretty nice idea. It offered the guests a greater selection and saved me paying a cook. That night, after the kids had gone to bed and the lodge was empty, I asked Judith to join me in my bed. She accepted. There was no sex, but we had a nice cuddle which lasted all night. My cardiologist had told me it would be at least 2 months before I could have sex. I tried again. Damned if he wasn't right. Judith curled up in Perk's arms. They were lying in his bed, supposedly sleeping. Well, he was sleeping, as she could tell by his soft snoring. She was lying there horny as hell. She felt his strong body, smelled his masculine odor, and just enjoyed the hell out of being with him. She remembered showering with him and his disappointment over not being able to make love. If he thought he was disappointed, he should be in my shoes, she thought. She knew this was going to be the longest 2 months in her life. She wanted Percy in her now. It took a few hours longer before she could go to sleep. Judith drove me to my cardiac rehabilitation sessions. Between the physical therapist and Judith, I was sure they were trying to kill me. They made me run on a treadmill until I was ready to drop, Then they dragged me to a series of exercise machines and beat me up if I didn't do the required reps. When I finally begged enough, they let me stop. Not all the exercising, just those machines. They dragged me back to the treadmills and made me put in another 30 minutes. They exercised me for almost 2 hours at every session. I was completely wasted when they finished. All I wanted to do was lay down and die. Judith helped me to my truck and drove me back to the lodge. When we reached the lodge, I dragged myself out of the truck cab. Judith met me at the front of the truck and walked with me. Not into the building, but around the grounds for another 30 minutes. When she finally let me sit down on the steps, I thought, what the hell did I ever see in that woman? She's a sadist. This treatment went on for the next 2 months. I started to feel stronger and my chest didn't hurt so much anymore. Dean sat by his wife's bedside. She just lay on her back and stared at the ceiling. She did not utter a sound. The doctors came and went from her room. They told him that it would just take time until she snapped out of her catatonic state. All he knew is that she was in her own little world and he couldn't get her out of it. He spent all his waking hours talking to her with no results. She just laid there, eyes open staring straight ahead, blinking every once in a while. He felt so alone. One day while he was holding her hand, she squeezed his hand. There were tears in her eyes. It was the first time she reacted. He was crying for joy as he pushed the nurse call button. Maybe his Jenny was coming back to him. Jenny was locked in a memory loop. Inside her brain, she was reliving all the terrible things Master had done while she was a captive. Suddenly, she remembered being pregnant. The trip to the doctor. The staff meeting in Dad's office where she announced her pregnancy. Then she remembered her husband, her new dad, Todd, Tara. She suddenly felt she was a part of a family. They loved her and wanted her back. Then she remembers the baby had died. She started to cry. She wanted her husband and family to share her sorrow. She felt someone holding her hand with great love. She squeezed it. One morning I woke up and found my morning wood. Holy shit, I've got it working. I thought. It was the first time I had one since I killed Jermaine. Suddenly I heard a voice, a smiling voice. Shall I turn over and see if we can put it to good use? Slow down, Perk. I want to enjoy this too, she said as she rolled over and put her leg over mine. She made very slow and very tender love with and to me that morning. When we finally tired, we just held each other. It sort of felt good to have her in my arms. I pulled her close to me, then I heard, "Get up, you too. There are customers who would like breakfast." Judith slipped out of my arms and ran into the bathroom. I heard the shower start, and just before the door closed, she said, "Stay there. I'll be back after breakfast is done. I want you all rested up when I return. You're going to pay for keeping me unfulfilled for the last 2 months." I uttered those magic words that all husbands know so well. Yes, dear. I closed my eyes and went to sleep. I needed my strength back. That woman was an animal. Judith let me sleep until after lunch. We again made slow and tender love to each other until it was time to serve dinner. Later that evening, she appeared with a tray of food. "You need to keep your strength up," she said. "I plan to drain you again." She did. Both later that night and in between meal servings the next day. For the next few weeks, we spent most of our time in bed. We had a lot of time to make up for. I don't want to leave, thought Judith. I liked waking up next to Perk in the morning. For the first time in almost 50 years, I had a family that depended on me. Tara and Todd had been calling her Mom for a couple of months. And even better, they meant it. While Jenny still wasn't completely back to normal, she held Judith's hand a lot and asked her opinion on everything. Dean was treating her as if she was his mother-in-law, a mother-in-law that he liked and respected. "I have enough money to live comfortably if I don't go crazy spending," she remembered. But would Percy let me stay? They didn't need to get married again. All he had to do was let her share his life and his bed. If he did that, she would be a very happy woman, and she would make him a very happy man. It finally came, the moment in time I was dreading. The doctor declared me 100%, and there was no longer a reason for Judith to stay here anymore. That night we held each other in my bed, and I softly cried myself to sleep. She had crept back into my heart, but I knew down deep she would be leaving soon. Her life was in Boston, not here. The next morning the sheriff telephoned me. "Would you help a friend of mine?" "Sure," was my reply. "I'll be around at lunchtime." "You're buying. Extortion is a crime, you know?" I laughing replied. Over lunch, the sheriff explained the case to me. Judith was there the whole time, listening and staying unusually quiet. The case amounted to a husband suspecting his wife of cheating on him with another man. The problem was the man was a very important person in the area, and the husband could not just come out and confront them. "Would you help the guy? You're the best detective I've ever seen," he asked. I don't have a PI license, I replied. The sheriff slid some papers across the table to me. It was PI license, a special deputy declaration, and a special carry permit for a concealed weapon. You're legal now, he stated. Judith took my hand and said, take the case. I'll stay here and run the kitchen. She smiled that certain smile at me. I knew at that point in time, Judith was here to stay and I was a very happy man. Okay, I know that she and I will have our problems, but we'll work them out. I took the case and started my life as a detective again. I think Judith just might stay around a lot longer, if I didn't piss her off. At least Judith would be here for Christmas, if it worked out. Just maybe Tara would get her Christmas wish. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.